I'm so pleased to be here today and to share with you some ideas about my own art history, and glad to be welcomed back to the state of Georgia, the city of Atlanta, the High Museum. And I think most of you know that I'm a very proud Georgian. I go around different places talking about my art, and I say I was born in Eatonton, Georgia, and people say, Eatonton, Georgia. Why do I know Eatonton, Georgia? And I usually say, because Alice Walker was born there. And then I tell them, but I was born there before she was. So, when Michael Shapiro came to my home in Hyattsville, Maryland, several years ago, and talked about the dream he had for diversity in the arts at the High Museum. Not to say that some had not taken place, but I thought it was both enterprising and noble that he would include me in it, and I was simply delighted to respond. And as a result of that, with the hard work, as Michael has pointed out, of Rhonda Matheson, Philip, and so many other people, the Driskell Prize is a reality, and it is sharing the gifts of art history. It is sharing the talents of others. It is also sharing what we consider to be an important legacy here at the High Museum. And before I begin my remarks and showing additional slides, I just want to thank the audience, people who came out today. It's such a beautiful day out. You know, you could be so many places, and people have come from so many different places. Dr. Art Bacon all the way from Talladega College, Talladega, Alabama, Dr. and Mrs. Outlaw all the way from Nashville, Vanderbilt University, and I could go on naming people who are here, and it's so wonderful to see you here today. Brooks, Professor and Mrs. Brooks, and others. One of my former students that I don't think I've seen in close to 40 years, Karen Powell, an artist who was one of the first students who came to work with me at Fisk University when I was there in the 1960s. And so there are many generations, actually. Almost all of the generations that I've taught here are represented here. Someone here that I taught at Bearden College, or at least had an association with in 1973 when I was there. So the list goes on. So much for that. I'm blessed to stand before you this afternoon to share with you some aspects of my own art history within the shadow of my 77th birthday, and talk about a few of the things that have helped sustain me both spiritually and physically, and to say a few words about the vision, the inspired journey that I have had to try and capture beauty, to bring about visual literacy in the arts, and to talk about crossing into an acceptable creative world that is not possible without the aid of an artist. And when you think about it, artists are those special people, not special because they dress differently, not special because, as one of my grandchildren said to me, no, you don't want to be an artist because they act funny. For whatever that means. And so we don't expect them to be artists simply because of those things, but they are artists because they have a special mission. They have a passion for something that most people say, I can't do, I can't even draw a straight line. Well, if you really want to be an artist, nobody's going to force you to draw a straight line. They may ask you to draw a crooked line. They may ask you to draw something that is out of the range of the ordinary, something that doesn't exist. And so that's when the art making starts taking place. When you, the individual, began to create something that somebody will either want or would like to look at, would like to share, what have you, that would not have existed without your being there, then you are making art. Art is that product which comes from the soul of humankind. In all of its manifest ways, it remains, in a great sense, the measure of all things when it comes to our humanity. It will be the record by which we will be known in years to come. And it is that trace of humane involvement that we have in the animal world that sets us apart and says that we are very special to ourselves, to others, and to the great Creator. We imitate nature or the ways of nature in our making, but we always try and make it clear that we are not trying to be nature itself. Nature is there in all of its convincing ways. Well, time will not permit me to go into an introspective look at myself as I would like to share with you, but most audiences want to know, well, if a person says that he's an artist, what does that mean? Why is he or she an artist? Who gives them the right to tell us that they can make new form? Because it wasn't there until we made it. So who has the audacity to, in the words of Romare, engage in battle with the angels? For creativity is that domain which belongs beyond this sphere. And so the great Creator douses us occasionally with a little of it, so long as we don't get a swelled head and think that we are the greatest. We never finish the job. We only begin it. And we begin it for somebody else to come after us and keep working toward the finish line. Well, what are those compelling issues that I think help to characterize why I think I am an artist, or why I think I am who I am? First, I know that I have been greatly influenced by the environment in which I grew up. I love nature, the out of doors, plants, animals, the world, the physical landscape, where nature reveals herself in part in the land, the verdant growth of trees and plants, and the flowers that I very often paint in my work. The houses I've lived in, and the people who've been close to me, especially my family and friends. And secondly, I was greatly inspired by the teachings of my parents, and theirs was a direction deeply steeped in the Judeo-Christian faith. Consequently, one sees in many of my composition works that show the source of biblical themes being biblical themes, and they tend to occur over and over again. Thirdly, my intellectual pursuit of learning from the great civilizations of the world, particularly from many of the great cultures of West Africa, they enhanced my understanding of the world, and I decided that whatever I do, I want to incorporate some of that in my work so that my artistry will reflect in part my ancestral lineage. And there is finally the reverent yet abundant source of ideas that inform both my memory and my imagination from within. And this process gives birth to the important ingredients that occur in the making of art. These observations lead me to ask important questions about the development of my artistry, how it came about, is it growing, will it continue to grow, when will I solve some of the problems that I have been trying to solve for the last 60 years in my artistry. Now, many of you, you are looking at a scene in my studio in Hydesville, Maryland. And I also have a studio, which I'll show you later, in Falmouth, Maine, where I spend the summer working. Now, many of you have heard me tell the story, and I won't go back into great details about when my parents moved to what is now called Appalachia, in the western part of North Carolina, about 40 miles from Asheville. In Rutherford County, we kind of oscillated between Rutherford County and Cleveland County. In the 1930s, just after the Great Depression, we left the state of Georgia and moved to North Carolina. And there I grew up and attended a one-room school for elementary school, a four-room high school, 35 miles away from where I lived. Had to be bused there, a total of 70 miles every day. Passing 5 or 6 beautiful, well-equipped high schools along the way with 50, sometimes 60 classrooms that I could not attend because of the color of my skin. Now, my parents had already informed me that it was not my intellectual ability that kept me away. They believed in me. And the next slide, please. In the studio in Maine, the next, the garden in Maine, which is a source for much of my artistry. I plant flowers, vegetables, and interchangeably all over the place, and the source of our food, but also the source of the beauty that is in my paintings. The next, please. When I travel to different places, I keep what I call a visual diary, which is a journal of sorts, and so I make notes and sketches and little paintings. This is a page from a notebook when I was visiting Elizabeth Catlett in Cuernavaca, in the state of Morelos in Mexico, in 1983, and I was en route to Brazil at that time. So I will keep these kind of notes to remind me where I've been, what I've done, and some of the cultural aspects of the artistry of the period. The next, please. In Brazil, when you go to Bahia, Salvador, Bahia, if you go to Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and those places, you know, you're just captivated by the beauty of the people. It's one of the so-called racial democracies of the world, where there's been an admixture of the races since the Pope said, when the Portuguese wrote home or went home and said, we don't have the women here to make this colony work, to cultivate the colony. And the Pope said, you're not there for that reason. You're there to propagate the faith and do it at all costs, even if it means the making of a new race. And so Brazil kind of naturally lived up to that, you know. It's very hard to tell that there is a race of people other than mixed people of color in Brazil. So they carried out the Pope's edict pretty good. Of course, slavery was at the base of that, and we don't want to give any compliments there. but that is part and parcel of what was going on. And so my sketchbook of being out on the beaches and the islands of, now you see, that's me over there. I'm sketching in the red. Now I'm not scantily clothed. This time, next. But I also sketch frequently when I'm at home in Hydesville, in Falmouth. In this case, there's a little bridge across the brook where there are water lilies and things like that. I guess I cultivate pretty much near about an acre of garden when you count the water lilies and all that kind of thing. And so this has been one of my paradisios, of my sketching areas, so to speak, over the years. I said I was grounded in traditions which go back to the Judeo-Christian faith, and my mother, Mary Lou Cloud Driskell, and my father, Reverend George Washington Driskell, talked to me about the values of life. And we were sharecroppers when we moved to North Carolina. We didn't own any land. We didn't know we were poor until the sociologists came along and told us, because we ate well, we lived under a good roof, and we wore decent clothing. But my father always had the notion that we would have that which belonged to us. And so in the early 1940s, he bought a parcel of land, about 13 acres, in Cleveland County, and he went out to build his own house. Next. Oh, you're there. Okay. I'm calling on Michael. Michael is not the one. This is a picture of my mother, our two daughters, Davreen down near my mother, Daphne in the background, myself, Thelma, and little Darius, who was about 4 years old then. He'll be 37 in our grandson in August. And this was at Fisk. We don't look like that anymore. This was the sharecropper's house, one of the sharecropper's houses that I grew up in North Carolina. And I treasure these memories, the photographs, the well at the front. We didn't have running water. We had a lifestyle which most of you couldn't even possibly consider being part and parcel of modern-day America. But in the words of the gospel singer Myrna Summers, through it all, we were able to see a light that was bright at the end of the tunnel. And my parents said to me, if you don't want to pick cotton all of your life, if you don't want to chop cotton and plow the corn and what have you, the way out of this is through education. And so as I started telling you, many of you heard the story of how I left this part of the country. In 1949, I boarded a train in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and went up to Howard University and presented myself with my report card and said, I'm here to go to college, because my teachers had said everybody should go to college. And I was the first in my family to pursue that goal. And of course, the professors, not the professors, but the administrative people looked at me like I had come from Mars. School had been in session 3 weeks when I arrived. And report card in hand, they said, you can't just come to college. You have to make an application. And I said, well, I'm here, give me one. So I proceeded to start sitting in on classes. And long before the Greensboro and Nashville sit-ins, 1949, I was sitting in on classes at Howard University until they finally said, please, if you please, the teachers, knowing that I hadn't paid any money, said, if you don't come back until January, we'll make sure that you are properly enrolled. I went back. I didn't pay them any attention. I wrote home and said, I'm in college. And I was. And later, of course, I was invited to come the right way. Now, Michael, I know I don't have it so long, so I'm not going to keep telling all these little lead-ins. But they make the person, they make the artist, they make David Driskell maybe a little different from Kevin Cole. They make David Driskell a little different from Lev Mills. They make David Driskell a little bit different from Art Bearden. They make David Driskell a little different from Michael Harris when they make art. And so I'm simply saying your environment, all of these things combined, your family, your values. This was my father's little farm there that I painted in 1955. This was the first painting I did upon return home after graduating from Howard University. This is the house, the little house that my father built in the early 1940s. He went down to the brook and lugged all of these stones up the hill and built this little 5-room house, which we were so proud to have and called home. Well, we still own the land. The house is still there, but the kudzu vines have taken over because nobody lives there. The next, please. 1950s at Howard University. In 1953, I was chosen to go to the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Skowhegan, Maine. The next, please. And there, I kind of met the art world. I really met artists from all over the world. It was a scholarship that only a few schools in those days had to this very prestigious summer school. Skowhegan was founded in 1946 by artists for artists, and it is considered today the most important summer school for artists in the world, not just in the state of Maine. Well, I had never been north of Baltimore prior to that time, and so you can imagine my getting on the train going all the way to Maine, looking out, seeing the tall buildings in New York and Boston, and thinking, wow, what have I been missing down in the cotton fields? And, of course, my pursuit of work at Howard University. The next, please. This is Skowhegan as you would see it today, with the various buildings that where students work, sculpture, painting, photography, etc. The next, please. And upon my return from Skowhegan and my first visit to New York City in 1953, I painted this composition called Boy with Birds. And I was taken with what I had seen in New York City, the clamor of this place. It seemed like everybody lived on top of each other. Streetcars and, well, not streetcars, but the subway, rushing past. And a friend who hosted me the one evening that I was there took me to Harlem and down Broadway to see the lights. I had never seen anything like this before. So it started making an impression on me in a way that has remained with me to the extent that I fell in love with New York City and I live part of my life there today. And the next, please. Then I was lucky to get a job teaching at Talladega College in Alabama in 1955. And you were looking at DeForest Chapel, and I don't have any of the slides from the windows, but there are 65 stained glass windows that I designed there with the help of my friend Art Bearden, and they were installed in 1996. So if you're over Talladega, it's almost like an art campus with the Hale Woodruff murals in the Savory Library, Swain Hall, this elegant, beautiful classical building in the center of the campus, and of course the late 19th century, early 20th century, Neo-Romanesque chapel, DeForest Chapel, where the murals are located. The next, please. This is a study for one of the windows at the front of the chapel. And this is one of the windows. The next. Now, I said I had been influenced by the iconography of African art over the years, and this is a Gele de mask from the Yoruba people of Nigeria in my collection that I have loved to draw from over the years. The next, please. And so the drawings will show certain aspects of the poem, but most importantly, I'm trying to express myself as I feel when I am interpreting these works. The next. The works will manifest themselves in many ways, as in the case of the Spirits Watching, a lithograph that I did at the Brandywine Workshop in 1986. The next, please. And G's Ben, they don't have anything on me. I quilt too. My mother was a strip quilter, and she was a very good quilter. But I wanted to quilt, and she said, no, boys don't quilt. So as soon as she turned her back, I would go and get something and start sewing and stitching and crocheting and doing all those things that demasculined you. And so as late as the 1960s and 70s, I said, well, I'm grown, I'll do what I want to do. And in the words of James Weldon Johnson, I will make me a quilt. And so this was not the first quilt I made, but this is one of the quilts. Next, please. And then the iconography of my work started changing. I was pulling in African designs. This is the 1960s, a composition called The Chieftain's Chair in the collection at Howard University. The next, please. Still influenced by forms of Africanity in the sense that I'm looking at textiles, costumes, and gungu costumes in particular, Bahia and lace in this case. The next, please. This is an Ngungun costume in my collection in Maryland, and I think you can see the relationships of my looking. You know, some artists won't tell you they've been looking at things. They pretend it just came to them. I was sleeping one night, and I woke up, and this thing was hovering over my head. Yeah, over your head. If you don't look, you're not an artist, because you are the visual interpreter for the world. And you're the one who give us the new vision. And so that is part and parcel of what we do. So I look at African art. I look at people. I look at trees. I look at all those things. I look at chairs. I did a whole series based on chairs. The next, please. Another work influenced by the Ngungun costume. The next, please. A work that I did, I think in 2005, may have been 2006. I do a lot of things for my friends in kind of commemorative pieces. And this is called Night Vision, and it's a work on paper. It's nothing like as large as what you see it there. It's about 30 by 22. And it's a combination, mixed media, collage, and what have you. And it's called Night Vision, and it is a piece that I did in the memory of our good friend Jacob Lawrence. The next, please. This one is probably one of the larger compositions I've done, about the same size as the work that the High owns here. And it's from a series of studies from the masks on, what is it? Dancing? What is it called? Dancing. Dance of the Mask. Okay. Happily, Dr. McGee, who wrote the book on me, is here. So, next, please. And I still go back to things in houses, chairs, old Oregon at Skowhegan. I painted it in 1953 when I was there, and then when I went back in the 70s, I painted it again. Then I went back 2000 something, I painted it again. So I kind of keep in touch with myself that way. The next, please. A small composition called The African Saint, which is in Professor McGee's collection. It's a collage. The next. The Dancing Angel. The painting, the oil and collage painting in which this print was taken, is in the collection at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And this particular work is in several collections, including the High Museum, the National Gallery of Art, and others. It is the silk screen that Lou Stovall did in relation to that particular painting. The next, please. This is about a year and a half ago, and these angels are part of my painterly repertoire as a part of my listening to my father's sermons. This is the Angel of Peace. And so I move in and out of figuration this way with my works, but they are almost always very colorful, somewhat based on a palette that is close to stained glass window palette. The next, a series of small studies of the Caribbean or Caribbean woman. The next, Let the Church Roll On, echoes, kind of homage to my father, the little church at the parsonage, near the parsonage where I was born in Eatonton, Georgia. And my father always said, angels watch over our little churches. And so we have here this kind of literal interpretation of the angel. And if you look very closely all the way to the right, you'll see my self-portrait there, which is part of the composition. The next, please. From the series 2006 that were part of my exhibition at the D.C. Moore Gallery in New York, landscapes, going back to the environment, going back to the land. The next, please. This is Down by the Brook from that same series, 2006. The next. In my studio in Falmouth, Maine, working on a print that was to be executed at the Brandywine Workshop, a lithograph, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in 2006. The next. And this is the print, the basis. The next. I've gone back to prints that I cut as early as woodcuts that I cut as early as the 1960s when I was teaching at Fisk University. And this is called Thelma Festival, and I cut this woodcut from the seat of a chair in 1966. I had a lot of strength back then. Can't cut into those oak and maple forms anymore the way I did. But I ran it in black and white, and for years I just ran in black and white. And then later on I came in contact with a master printer up at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, by the name of Curly Holton. And we have become good friends and good studio mates in that he has been helping me to transform these into color prints by using contemporary technology with color in the background and then the overlay of the woodcuts up front. These are part of a series of woodcuts and prints that are in the exhibition Evolution, which is currently on view at the Driskell Center at the University of Maryland at College Park through mid-March, and will be here at the High Museum in April of next year. The next, this is another scene working on that same print, the studio in Maine. And this is the house in Maine. We had visitors from the High Museum this summer. We're very pleased to welcome them. We lived there in the woods, enjoy all of it. It's very beautiful and surrounded by nature. The next, the studio there that I always tell people this is my architectural masterpiece. I built it with my own hands. So I love my little studio. Next, the brook where the water lilies and all the inspiration that so many of my paintings come from, the wildflowers and what have you. The next, the vegetable garden that is a source for our food during the summer. And I still, in the tradition of my mother, you know, like she said, boys don't quilt, boys don't sew, boys don't can, I still can. Next, please. This is the front yard in relation to the house and the studio. Now, I wouldn't be showing you these, I'm not showing you these with the notion that, you know, it's like this the year round in Maine. If you go there now, you would be very disappointed. You would not see that. Okay. All right, I'm going to cut it off. Quick, run. Okay, next, please. Pines behind the studio, next. Another nature study scene. This one is in the Farnsworth Museum in Maine. This one is called Pine Trees at Night. It's at the National Academy, just become an academician at the National Academy. And this was the painting that went there. Just quickly, very quickly, you don't have to, as quick as you can pull them through, back to the 50s. From the Pine Tree series. Chester, the farmer and his wife, the seer, and the stained glass windows at People's Congregational Church in Washington, another version of Echoes. And the book, and Dr. Harris has already told you we're going to have a book signing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. It's always great to get personal insight into an artist and his or her motivation in life and world. Now, Julie, if you'll join us up on stage, we will have a few questions in front of you and then entertain some questions from you. As David, today you get to be like a salmon. We're going to grill you the rest of the afternoon.
Okay.
First, I'd like to invite Julie McGee into this conversation and ask, art historians often talk about their subject matter and why they choose a particular dissertation topic. So with that in mind, how did you approach the book, and were there any, tricky things to negotiate since you were dealing with a living artist?
Well, first let me thank the High and the Department of Education for inviting me here and for making this possible. And I, of course, wouldn't be here without David Driskell. Oh, the book. I think the book found me in the sense that, for those of you who don't know, I live up the road from where David Driskell lives in Maine. And I, as an art historian who teaches African American art, there are not many people in Maine to actually talk with about that subject. So I think my initial, well, not even I think, my initial meeting with David Driskell was really about teaching art history and teaching African American art, and especially teaching at a small liberal arts college where the large majority of my students were white, and a lot of them from Maine as well. So it really was, in some ways, a process of me first having enormous respect for his work in the field, to the point that I could not teach in the classroom had he not come before me without his work. So initially I would say I was approaching him as someone who teaches African American art and trying to understand this relationship of a person who's living not just as an artist, but really someone who had created the field into which I now teach. And we developed a rapport and a relationship over time. I wrote about his work, spoke about his work. And I think probably, so in that sense, Dr. Driskell asked me to write the book. And how I approach the book, on the one hand, you all have listened to him speak many times. In part, it's let him be there and get out of the way. I think a lot of art historians get in the way of the artist and the artist's work. So that was something that was really important to me. And initially, the book was to be under the mandate, and I think really the desire of the press, Pomegranate, to only be about his visual work. And probably because he plays such an important role in how I teach African American art, and also the way I see his work, it seemed inseparable from the rest of his life. So one of the ways that I managed to get around that was to structure the book the way it's structured around educational institutions. So it really was, for me, I wanted to weave them into his work as an educator. And I'm not sure the most difficult thing, was that the second question?
Not the most difficult, but were there any things you had to kind of negotiate, because you're dealing with a living artist, and
Sure.
then you're writing in a series that he inaugurated,
Yeah.
and you're writing about someone in a field who is one of the founding forces of the field. So talk about that.
I think I struggled. I mean, the project was both an enormous gift and an enormous responsibility. And I had to first decide who was my audience, because he has a variety of different audiences. And the other books in the series weren't necessarily models for me in that way. And really, I think because I'm an educator, probably first and foremost, I decided I wanted to write a book that I could send my students to, so that from that book they could find something out about him as a significant artist, scholar, curator, and then from that book be introduced to other things too, so that it pushed them out at the same time that it drew them in. And I think from a personal standpoint, probably choosing which works to actually include when you're actually dealing with a live artist, because we obviously would have I have a very different association to the works, far more visual and historical. And as he was just saying to you, these are the stories that make his work what they are, as opposed to your works, what they might be. So that probably, we would go back and forth. I created a list. He would put things on. I would put things on. We would pull them out. That was a give and take, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
And David, how did you enjoy the experience of being the subject?
Well, artists are the most vain people in the world. So nothing was lost on, I'm always being accused of being in the spotlight. And I would have done that, but you jumped up and did it. Well, artists lead. Their role is to be leaders in the world. They're seers. I say they have a priestly function. I always get biblical on people and say, it's like in the prophecy of those in the Hebrew scriptures Because behold, I set thee as a watchman on the walls, watching over Jerusalem. You're going to be able to tell the people what's coming. And so that's what artists do. Leonardo told us there was going to be a helicopter 500 years before somebody perfected it. The Egyptians made a model of it 3,500 years earlier. And maybe those cells that were supposed to communicate that weren't quite active enough to do it until now. But see, that's the vision of the artist. And so in our vanity, and you're an artist, we cherish that Jacques Maritain. I've just finished reading Julie's paper that she's writing about my writing in 2 centuries, 30-some years ago. And the conference is coming up March 7th and 8th at the University of Maryland. I was reading her paper, and she quotes me from my leaning toward those writings that are more spiritual in nature, Jacques Maritain and Etienne Gilson, Ananda Coomaraswamy, and others who talk about the spirituality of life, of art and life. And that's part and parcel of what artists try and key in on, not just the physical aspect and the narrative part that you see, but they go inside and try and pull out what's in their soul. So as I said earlier, you would not have seen this thing had not an artist made it or did it. And you'll never see it done the same way again. And that's why, you know, when it's a reproduction or something like that, it's just not art, you see, because you can just get so many versions of that same thing. Well, the art is always original. And Aristotle said it always resides on the side of the mind. And as hard as you try, you will never be able to put out, in the Platonic sense, what is pure about the art. And that's what keeps you going. You keep trying. You never get there. You never get there. So this question of how does it feel? It feels good. It feels it feels good to be here and know that somebody thinks enough about you to write about you. Because most artists don't get that privilege. They see it from the grave. And that's not the best position to be seeing it from.
Well, one of the things I like to look at philosophically is that the visual realm is not the same as the literal oral realm, so that you can do things with language that you can't do with the image. So this being written about and articulating what you're doing is a very difficult conversation, because you're talking about something in a different form. Mm-hmm. It's like trying to paint music. But shifting gears, since you talked about the priestly function of art, let's shift to the political function. And and the book is very thorough. You get insight that is rare, and she's done a great job in pulling together information that's just so thought-provoking. But I read about your encounter when you, in your early days in Washington, with segregation in the city, and how you were able to go to the Phillips collection, but not necessarily the Corcoran. And so how did you respond to that political reality and difficulty in your work?
Well, I don't think I did very much to deal with it visually, even though I had a teacher when I went to Skowhegan who was very good at showing the political side of things, Jack Levine. And when I came back from Skowhegan, I really wanted to paint in a way that would say, yes, I have this political instinct. I want to help correct the ills of society. And I learned later that I wasn't disciplined enough to do it the way Jack Levine did it, in the tradition of painting the way the Dutch masters did, from dark to light, chiaroscuro, going through all of that, putting down the image in burnt umber, then putting it down in sienna, and then in ochres, and then and so forth. I said, I could be, you know, painting 5 or 6 pictures by the time I do all that. So, you know, art is discipline. Art is something that you don't put your hand to the plow and turn loose. You hold on. And I was aware of the politics of the world, of the nation and all of that. But somehow or another, I learned early on that there were other artists out there who could do it better than I, like writers and filmmakers and photographers. Now, the photographer can seize the time and freeze that image in place so that you'll never forget seeing Martin Luther King walk across that bridge in Selma. Now, I can say I'm going to do it, but I don't do it with the same convincing power. And so I think one of the important responsibilities of the artist is to define himself or herself, to know the boundaries of his or her artistry. What can I do and what can I do well? And what should I be doing? And so, yes, you can do it in literature a certain way. You can do it a certain way with the film and what have you. But there are some limitations when it comes to how I can do it. So I decided early on that I could not really be an artist who painted to make social change so much as I wanted to share with the world the beauty that was in my soul. And, you know, there's so much ugliness in the world that we need somebody out there trying to give us a sense of beauty, truth in that sphere. So that was, I did try when the death of Emmett Till in 1955. In 1956, I was living in Alabama. I was teaching at Talladega College, and I was just so angry about the civil rights thing and how African Americans were treated, how we were being treated at that time. Professor Tuskegee telling about going to vote with a PhD and somebody at the voting booth with what seemed like a third-grade education saying how many bubbles in a bar of soap. And then if you tell me that, then you can vote. But those were the kinds of things that some African Americans were confronting at that time. So to try and politicize it in my art, I didn't have all the tools to do it. I did do this painting called Behold Thy Son. It's in the book, where I was just crying my heart out about the death of this 14-year-old kid in Mississippi. So you'll have to stop me. I'll keep going.
Well, I find it interesting because, and part of the reason I asked the question is because of the religious family background, the priestly function in art, and there is a history here, and as we see coming up in the Civil Rights Photography Exhibition, the Civil Rights Movement being inspired by the SCLC, the priestly leadership, formed a response that is not quite directly political, but begins to involve other things, and I wondered if that was a part of your response. And what you've said reminds me of what a close friend of mine told me, who's a poet, and that is poetry deals with truth and beauty. So there's a poetic essence to your art that seems to be a part of it. Julie, do you have any questions?
No, well, I was just going to say, I think when you first posed that question, you were asking about how he dealt with, I think, basically political and racial issues in his work, and I was thinking, well, that's where, what work are we talking about? Just the visual art or the rest of his work? Because I think that's because of the enormous capacity of him to work outside just the visual production. So as a scholar, as a classroom teacher, as a curator, I would say his work has been nothing but sort of striving for something that is to address inequality at the same time with his visual work addressing that spirituality that he's interested in. So I think he was able to do that, but at the same time free up maybe the visual space.
Well, Julie, you wrote that David supports, quote, African American art praxis through its relationship to all art, but most especially American art. Mm-hmm. Could you comment on that? Because, you know, there are discussions about African American art. Toni Morrison has written about in terms of African American literature that American literature cannot be understood without the Africanist presence or dealing with its absence or lacuna. So would you comment about that and American art, perhaps ways and levels of looking at that art with that African American connection?
Yeah.
Either of you or both of you.
Well, I think there, I'm not sure which section of the book you're talking about, but David Driskell has always said African American art is American art. And I think part of it is, that actually one of the things you have in the preface to your book, you're of a tale of you're standing on either side of the elephant, right? And one person sees one thing and another person sees something very different, but it's the same elephant, right? So we are talking about American art. His practice, though, drawing from a variety of aesthetic traditions, is very American. It's also African American, and I think American art is African American art, and that's really what I think he's been working and striving to tell us, and that his work also tells us. Mm-hmm. And that also includes the African diasporic element.
Yeah, often music makes an easier metaphor for looking at it because jazz is a classical American music, but it is rooted in African American experience. So perhaps, is that useful?
Yeah, that's useful. It's I was never very good at philosophy, but I remember trying to learn about the syllogism. All SSP and all something. Well, in the final analysis, it's all part and parcel of one thing. And there is no such thing as a separation of the arts except in our minds, because it's all done the same way. The process doesn't change because, the color of your skin is different from somebody else. Even when my teachers at Catholic University taught me certain things, I never viewed them as being anything other than American art. Just like I had viewed what Professor Porter, Professor Herron, all these teachers, Lois Jones, James Wells, and even the lectures that we go and attend for Alain Locke and John Hope Franklin and those people in what I refer to as the good old days at Howard University. In those days when the eminent giants were there, and we were compelled to go and listen to them. We didn't do it on our own, and most students don't. We'd have to go to chapel, Rankin Chapel, on Thursday and Fridays to listen to Alain Locke, or to Leo Hansberry, or to James Porter, to Merz Tate, and the list would go on. And we didn't know who these people were. We, with youth comes a certain amount of innocence, but mainly ignorance. And unless somebody stood up over you and said, do it, we didn't do it. We'd come back laughing, talking about, Alain Locke talks funny. Brilliant man. Had been the only Rhodes Scholar up until that time, and somebody should have been there to knock a little sense in our heads and say, this is a brilliant man. And we had to wait and go out and read books. Say, oh, I was in his class. I was, so it shouldn't be that way, but it's that way. the acquisition of knowledge. And in my old age, I've come to the conclusion that it's okay to get it any way you get it. Just get it. I don't know what that has to do with what you asked me.
Well, see, this is more like in the Baptist tradition. We start somewhere and go. Anyway, let's open it up to the crowd.
I'm Congregationalist. I'm not Baptist anymore.
Well, we are.
I was born in that tradition.
As one of my friends said, we went to different schools together.
Yeah.
So let's open up to questions from the crowd. I think you've heard enough from me, so let's hear from you.
We only have time for a couple questions. It's been such a wonderful discussion and lecture. And wait for the mic, please.
Hi, I'm Billy Gaines, member of the board here at the High. I want to go back to the concept of what is political and civil rights, and to say that in many ways I think you're being very modest, because the result of an action can have as much impact politically and in terms of the fulfillment of a civil right. When you demonstrate that the art of African Americans is not peripheral, but a part of what is that art of the nation, and you do it in a scholarly way that is as intellectual, as systematic, as theoretical as any other scholar who tackles the work, you have already politically fulfilled the civil right that has been lacking for us as a people, and I mean as an American people. So I would say that while a given work beyond your Emmett Till piece may not scream, we must be recognized that your body of work has already transformed what African American art history and what American art history is, and that itself is so dynamically and scaringly political that you need not have ever painted a political statement.
Thank you. Okay, I have a comment and then I have a couple of questions. Julie, I want to commend you on the book and talking about the struggles that David went through to become an artist, and which, as an artist and educator, I often talk about that idea of what you're going to go through, not just being an African American artist and educator, but number two, David, the question is, how important was it for you in terms of attending Howard University? Like you say, you always tell the story how you walked in and you said, you know what, I want to go to Howard. I want to be here to get an education. But number three is, the second question is, how, I studied with your classmate, the late John Howard. And John Howard always talked about the idea of being an abstract artist and an African American, how it was then, and how has it changed? Because when you look at what's going on now, there's a lot of dialogue with a lot of what's called quote-unquote postmodernism.
What was the first one again? Let me go back.
The first one was how important it was for you to attend Howard University in terms of, you walking in at a historically black college and the mentorship that you received. I suppose that was still here. I don't see it.
Yeah, that was really grounding for me. And it's the kind of thing that in those days was done with such love and care by the teachers. I'm not saying they don't do it now, but you can imagine what would happen to me if I walked on the campus at the University of Maryland, and say, I'm just here to go to college. Well, I'd heard that Howard University was the capstone of Negro education, meaning the best there was. And so that's why I got on the train and went to Howard. I had been admitted to Shaw University, and I decided the night before that I wasn't going to Shaw, even though I didn't have any money. So I got on the train and went to Howard, because I wanted the best. So when I got there, I got the best. And some of it I didn't know I was getting the best, just like what I just said. You know, I didn't know those people were the giants of the professions. And they were landlocked at Howard because nobody else wanted them. Not because of their not being so brilliant. They were just as brilliant as anybody at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, what have you. But they couldn't go anyplace because of the color of their skin, not because of their intellectual ability. Now, the second part was about what? Mm-hmm. Right, okay. When I went to Howard and started studying early 1950s, there was a platform for abstract art there, but there was also the platform for realism and all those other forms. And one of my teachers was Morris Lewis, and he was teaching at Howard. Now, you don't see that in his biography because nobody seems to think that he ever taught at Howard other than me. But he did, and it was the only place he ever taught. He was an abstractionist, as you know, in Washington Color School or the color field painting. And abstraction wasn't necessarily in vogue in those days, but it was there. And we had to be grounded in it. But Lois Jones, James Porter, James Herron, and those people always said, you have to know what you're abstracting from before you can practice as an abstractionist in my class. And so I had to show them that I could draw like Rembrandt in that vein. I had to show them that I knew before I was allowed to experiment with abstraction. But now, of course, when I came back from Skowhegan, I just knew I had the last word in everything in art. So I, did a little abstraction, and it wasn't too bad when you look at it over the years. Some of it has survived. Now, when I was teaching, I felt that students should have the right to experiment, to keep up with what was going on in vogue and so forth and so on. But I still felt that, art is such a competitive field. You really need the fundamentals, and they need to be basic, before you go out and start saying, well, I'm an abstractionist, I'm a classicist. You ain't nothing until you discipline yourself and learn how to be something. And then you can compete. And that's been my premise all along.
Would you say something about James Porter as an artist in terms of his influence on you as well as an art teacher?
Yes, James Porter was my mentor in so many ways. I admired him as an artist. It seems that he had the dealt of hand where he could just render something, the drawings and what have you, and I was trying so hard to learn that. He was a wonderful painter, but most importantly, he was that dual person. He was a scholar, and I wanted to emulate him. I wanted to pattern my life after him. He came into Professor Wells' classroom, and I want to say 1951, and I was taking a drawing class from Professor Wells, and he looked over this is Porter, and he looked over my shoulders, and he said, and this was my first art class at Howard, and I was a history major at that time. And he looked over my shoulders and he said, what is your name? And I told him my name. He said, well, what is your major? He said, I haven't seen you over here before. And I told him history. And he was looking at my drawing. He said, well, you don't belong over there. You belong here. And I went and changed my major. And as the old story goes, live happy ever after. Because he had that kind of drawing power. And he would come to our home. The teachers I don't think they do this any longer. But he would come to our home and see what I was painting at home when I lived on K Street in Southeast Washington, over near the Sousa Bridge. And he would sit down and talk with me, my wife, and We had only one child then, Daverine. And he said, you know, you're a good painter. He said, but you have a good mind. And he said, you can't just sit here and paint for the rest of your life. He said, somebody has to help define the field. And since you have a good mind, you have to study, study, study. Biblically, study to show thyself approved.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.